The Xbox 360's life as a supported console has been long over, surpassed by things like the Xbox One and the Xbox Series S and X. And on top of that, we've had servers for iconic game franchises like Halo and Call of Duty being shut down over the past few years. With that, we also have more and more consoles succumbing to the red ring of death because it's not if, but when on some versions of these consoles, meaning there are fewer and fewer to buy off the market. But if you're like me and that opening kind of made you a bit nostalgic, then you've probably looked at least once for one of these consoles just to have in your collection, just to be able to play without a 50 gigabyte day one update. But the question arises, there are 3 versions of this console that were made over the course of its life from 2005 to 2013. Which one should I buy? Well, I bought all 3 iterations, and I'm going to break down the differences between each of them today, talk about their benefits and their disadvantages on each version, and come down to a conclusion on which one is best to buy in 2023. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Now, just to be clear before anybody leaves it in the comments, I am aware that these consoles were made all the way out until 2016, but when I say that they had a life from 2005 to 2013, I mean that time frame was when they were the newest Xbox on the market. By 2013, we had the introduction of the Xbox One, and the clock was ticking on the Xbox's life. So, from 2005 to 2013, they were it. And in that time frame, we had 3 different versions introduced. From 2005 to 2010, we had what is, in my opinion, the most iconic Xbox 360 design, which is just the Xbox 360. Then from 2010 to 2013, we had the Xbox 360 Slim, or Xbox 360S. And then by 2013, they introduced the last revision, the Xbox 360E. And like I said earlier, each of these has benefits and disadvantages. Starting off with the original Xbox 360, I have a very hard time recommending this to anybody because this is the generation that really struggled with the red ring of death. Like I mentioned, even today, fewer and fewer of these consoles are around because they just keep dying from the red ring of death. It wasn't an if, but a when for certain models, which is why I also don't recommend, if you're buying this generation, getting a console from 2005 to 2006, because these were the ones that were most heavily affected. However, even getting into 2007 with some improvements to the cooling system, it still happened. I mean, hell, this video happened because I started shopping for an Xbox 360 to replace the one that I was using to stream all my old Xbox 360 games, because that one was bought in 2007 and somehow still hasn't gotten a red ring, but it means too much to me to keep using on a regular basis, so I started shopping for a new one. I don't recommend this generation across the board, but especially models from 2005 to 2006 should be completely avoided. And it's not just the red ring of death that is the reason why these consoles just don't quite hold up to the others. One of the other key things is the fact that the 2005 to 2006 models didn't even have HDMI. In fact, the first console of this generation to introduce HDMI was the Elite version, which came in black with a 120 gig hard drive. If you get an earlier version than that, you're stuck with component or composite through this giant plug on the back. And while they did introduce HD to this generation of consoles, you weren't getting it if you used the cable that it came with. You do have some USBs on the console. You have 3 of them, 1 on the back and then 2 on the front under a door that is inevitably going to break if you use it enough. On top of that, this also still has memory card slots on the front, which is the only time we see this in the Xbox 360 lineup. You can opt for 32 megabytes, 64 megabytes, 128, or 256 megabytes. And I bought the biggest 256 megabyte version just to put it in there to complete the aesthetic, but I never use it. Because you can actually plug in standard USB drives, even bigger hard drives, and load saves, move profiles, all that kind of stuff that you would expect and what Microsoft expected you to originally use that memory card for. Well, now you can do it with a standard USB drive. But I would recommend using those thumb drives on the front USB ports because the back one can be used for the most ridiculous and yet somehow really well-designed accessory for this console, the Wi-Fi adapter. And yes, I said it's a well-designed piece because they very clearly intended for something to go there already, or it just happened to be super lucky that they were able to design an adapter that fit the Kensington lock and a second hole perfectly. Yeah, this console did not come with Wi-Fi out of the box because, well, it was 2005, and if you were going to hook up to the internet, it was probably wired. Then they realized that most people don't sit their TVs next to their routers and modems, so Wi-Fi might have been something worth adding. Oh yeah, and actually moving back to the storage for a second, if you don't want to save your profiles to the memory card or to an external USB drive, you can save it to the hard drive, which is this removable module on the top. You could get it in 20 gig, 60 gig, 128, or 256, or you could buy the 500 gig one that was only available on the Xbox 360 Slim and later, break it out of its enclosure, put it into the old enclosure, and have a 500 gig hard drive on an original Xbox. Don't do that. But this was a really cool design. You could actually just swap modules, and if you were a baller back in the day, you could have multiples of these hard drives with games saved directly to them, full game installs if you wanted to, and of course all of your profiles. And you could still move all those files between the drive on the outside, any external drives, or your memory cards. And again, aesthetically, this console for me, while I don't recommend people buy it now, is one of the most iconic designs of a console I personally think ever, but I know some people will probably disagree. But you had such an incredible look to this thing where it could be stood vertical, you could lay it down horizontal, everything sort of had a place. You had a really nice chrome disk drive, or matte white plastic if you went with the arcade, and one of the coolest boot up animations on a button ever. That was also used to indicate the red ring of death, and it was functional in more than just a neat little boot up animation because it would light up the different quadrants to tell you how many different players were on there. And you could see on the controller which of the quadrants indicated which player you were. We'll save talking about the controller until the end because you got the same controller with every single one of these consoles, but when it came to the original Xbox 360, the design was incredible, and while it was plagued with the red ring of death, there were a lot of function and form designs that just really worked. However, with that red ring of death plague and the fact that there are fewer and fewer of them on the market, I find it very hard to recommend this version in 2023, except for the most extreme collectors or people who are really willing to take care of them and keep them alive. So then with that, we'll move on to the Xbox 360 Slim. And the Xbox 360 Slim wasn't quite as iconic of a design, but it did have quite the iconic introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your new Xbox 360.
Yeah, this dude just straight up pulls an Xbox Slim out of an Xbox 360 original. That is some great marketing right there, to really show that you made the console smaller. And the way they did that was both really impressive internally and kind of cool externally as well. Internally, this console is definitely less affected by the red ring of death, though it can still happen. In fact, the one that I have was affected by the red ring of death until I put it in the oven and it seemed to fix the problem. True story, I had a fever of 101 degrees and needed to do something to keep my mind off it, so I threw the motherboard in the oven and it fixed itself. Wild. But either way, these are less likely to get the red ring of death, so I am more inclined to recommend this console to the average collector or somebody who just really wants to have one of these consoles to play older games with. The console also runs significantly quieter because the separated CPU and GPU that we had in the original Xbox 360 is now combined into one singular SoC with one fan and one vent. Super, super nice and much more reasonable if you're the kind of person like me who installs all your games on the hard drive, because as soon as the disk spins down, the console is practically silent. The design is definitely not my favorite, though it's pretty unique in its own right, and the main reason I feel like they went with this more angular look was to bring its design aesthetic in parity with the newly released Kinect, which, moving to the ports, is one of the new ports available on this console. Yeah, you get a dedicated Kinect port on the back for the people who wanted to play the Kinect, which people laugh now, but the Kinect was actually a pretty big deal when it came out because people were all about that motion control phase, courtesy of the Wii, and the fact that the Xbox introduced an option that let you do something similar without having to hold a controller was pretty big at the time, big enough to warrant its own port. Also, if you did want to play with the Kinect on the original Xbox, you could. They made a full power adapter for it, which I've bought and I used like twice, but it's there if you want it. Alongside the Kinect port around back, you also have 3 USB ports available, which kind of seem redundant considering you don't need a Wi-Fi adapter anymore because, well, Wi-Fi is now built into this console, but you have 3 USB ports, so I guess you have some pretty decent expansion with external drives if you want. And of course, you still have 2 USB ports up front, now moved to a vertical position, or horizontal if you lay it down, as opposed to the opposite being true with the original Xbox 360. You also still have the massive AV port on the back because, well, most of these still came with the AV cable instead of an HDMI cable, but you still have HDMI, which I highly recommend using in 2023. And sticking with the topic of AV for this console, we also get an optical audio port for things like surround sound through a receiver. Kind of cool if you want to get the most audio out of this, because previously you had to get it through one of their specific AV connectors that doesn't use HDMI, but now it's built right into the console, so kind of cool to see. And I know I already mentioned that it has Wi-Fi for connecting to Xbox Live, but if you want to wire in, you still have an Ethernet connector. But now that we've covered all the I/O, there are 2 big things about this console that really stood out to me, one of which I hate, and one of which I absolutely love. And the thing I love, so that we can start on a positive note, is the new hard drive configuration. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the way that Microsoft attached the old hard drive to the original 360. It was so unique, and while we had things like the PlayStation just giving us a screwdriver to remove and put in a new hard drive to the PS3, Microsoft made it toolless, made it fast, and made it simple. So what did they do for the new generation? Well, they just gave you a door and put the hard drive in there. That's not the entire story. They actually made them into these little modules, sticking with the module theme from the original 360, but this time it connected straight through a standard SATA port instead of having to pass through an adapter first. So now you just slot it in, close the door, it's sleek, it's hidden, you don't have to worry about it. And if you really want to get into the weeds, they actually shock mounted the rails that the hard drive goes into. So if you're moving the console around going to LAN parties, remember those? If you move it around, you're not going to damage the hard drive because it's going to shake a little with the console, keeping it from really getting damaged with a hard impact or too much vibration. I also have a feeling that they might have done that to keep the disk drive and its close proximity to the hard drive from interfering with the hard drive. But either way, nitty-gritty, shock mounted, kind of cool. Love the fact that they kept the modularity of the hard drives. And like I mentioned earlier, this version goes all the way up to 500 gigabytes, which meant that you could get an Xbox 360 Slim or E, because the E uses these same modules, with the same amount of storage as a launch version of the Xbox One. How messed up is that? But now moving on to the negative, the buttons on the front of this thing are touch sensitive. And that's the negative. Like, I appreciate the fact that Microsoft kept the ring of lights around the front so you could see how many players were connected, and they even kept the animation for the boot up, but they made the buttons touch, both the eject button for the disk drive and, most importantly, the power button. But because it's touch, it doesn't differentiate between things like fingers and pets rubbing against them. I had this console fixed and running for a total of 2 days before experiencing what everybody else who has already owned one of these consoles had probably experienced at least once, which is that you're in the middle of a game, your cat rubs against the console, and it just shuts down entirely. And I'm not entirely unfamiliar with this because I had an original Xbox One, the VCR style, and she had done that with that console before, but it had been so long since I've had to deal with that because all of my consoles now have physical buttons that it just took me by surprise, and I was brought right back to that level of frustration that I used to have. So that is the biggest negative with this console, is just physical buttons. Why? But tallying up everything I've said about this console so far, it is definitely a strong contender for somebody who just wants a functional Xbox 360 in 2023. You can still get the hard drives at a pretty reasonable price, though you need to make sure that you're getting first-party ones, because third-party ones on Amazon tend to not really work, and they won't allow you to play original Xbox games, which was a big deal for me. But they're less likely to be dying from the Red Ring of Death issues, and if you can put it somewhere where a pet's not going to rub against it, it's a pretty solid choice in console, with up to 500 gigs of space available to you. Pretty nice. And also with that 500 gigs, you can install all your games to the drive, and then the console operates in absolute silence, and you can connect it wirelessly to Xbox Live for however much longer the games you want to play have a server to play on. All of mine are dead now. Rest in peace, Halo 3 servers. Anyway, moving on to the last iteration of the Xbox 360 to ever come out, the 2013 Xbox 360e. And this one's kind of an oddball. Internally, the Xbox 360e is pretty much identical to the Xbox 360s, at least when it comes to things like thermals, volume, and the chip design. There are a few key differences around back though. These differences around back include a new power adapter going from the polarized cord from before to a standard barrel plug like what you'd find on a laptop. We also have one less USB port, and we have an 1/8 inch jack to your standard AV out if you really want to plug this console into a CRT television for some reason, but it's very clear they were prioritizing HDMI in this case. Oh, and actually the optical audio jack, as quickly as it arrived on the Xbox 360S, they took it away on the Xbox 360E. I'm not 100% sure why, because I know the people I've talked to who really like using that console, especially back in the day, said that that was one of the best things they added when they wanted to hook it up to their receiver and get surround sound in games like Halo. So, kind of odd to see it left out, but I have my theories on why. And my theory actually ties into why this console looks the way it does, because when this came out in 2013, it was introduced alongside the new Xbox One, or new at the time Xbox One, and you can tell by its design that they really wanted to make the lineup of Xbox products from the 360 to the One look similar. And if you remember, the Xbox One's introduction was all about
TV, MTV, TV.
Yeah, so the Xbox One had your optical audio jack, but the Xbox 360 was clearly not the priority for Microsoft anymore, and they probably wanted to push more people who wanted the best sound from their console over to the new shiny Xbox One. So that might have been why they got rid of the optical jack. But that's also why this console looks the way it does, because that two-tone matte and gloss finish was pretty much the big push in design that Microsoft was going for with the Xbox One. And fortunately, some of the things that the Xbox One wanted to push never made it to the 360, like being always online.
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
That aged like fine milk. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, this is where the Xbox 360 story begins to come to a close, because this version of the 360 was the last chapter. But it's not all bad, because this was the most refined version of the Xbox 360, and while it definitely wasn't very different from the Slim, it definitely added a few things that were very welcome. The chief among which is the fact that they got rid of those stupid touch buttons on the front and gave us back physical buttons. However, that does come at a cost, which is that we got rid of that iconic quadrant-based setup for the button. I don't know why they did that, but I really wish they hadn't. Now when a console has a controller connected, it just lights up the whole ring. And there's also no cool boot up animation, which makes me sad. But it is the most sleek looking of the generations. You don't have angles like you did on the Xbox 360S, and it's definitely not iconic and curvy like the original Xbox 360. It's just sort of a console. And for most people, if you're looking for a 360, these are about the same price as the other two, assuming you're not going for a collector's edition or an original that's still in its box. So if you're just looking for a console, a 360, this isn't a bad option. And it has the biggest hard drive options available, all the way up to 500 gigs, as I mentioned, and no stupid touch buttons. And actually, just like the 360S, if you install all your games onto the hard drive, as soon as the disk spins down, this console is also dead silent. I would say even potentially a little bit quieter than the 360S. So if that's a consideration for you, might be worth it. For me, I think that the Xbox 360E is probably the best option for somebody just looking for a general Xbox 360 experience. They don't really care about the look of the console. They don't really care about having the iconic version, or their first or their favorite was the Angular S. They just want a 360 to go back and play 360 games. If that's the case, the E is probably going to be the one you want to go with, because it's the newest version, so like a car terminology, it has the fewest miles on it, even if you're buying one used, and it's also the most refined. Fans are quieter, buttons are no longer touch, and you actually don't really have priority on an AV connector, you have priority on HDMI. And when I say priority, I mean that there's just not a big off plug on the back for your AV connector. But I said earlier I was going to save the controllers for last, and that's just because, well, you get the same controller with all of them. The iconic Xbox 360 controller, my personal favorite controller from the Xbox lineup, aside from the Duke. Yeah, I'm one of those weirdos who likes the Duke, don't judge me. But the 360 controller was great, because the fact that you didn't have a battery pack taking up the entire back of the console horizontally meant that you had these deeper grips for your fingers, and While you don't have rumble in the trigger like you do on the Xbox One or the haptics like you do on the PS5, you had reasonable haptics, good button placement all around, my personal preferred placement for the joysticks, and not so great D-pad, though if you find one of the Xbox 360 controllers that has the rotating D-pad, you can fix that. And again, the awesome quadrant lights, so that if you're playing anything other than player one, you can see which player you are, and depending on the game, if the game's made well, that quadrant will correspond with where you are on your 4-screen multiplayer. God, I love couch co-op. So then to recap, the original Xbox 360 is a fantastic looking console. In my opinion, a stupidly beautiful console for its time. Really unique. I love the look. But it also takes a lot of know-how and a lot of patience in 2023 to keep one of these alive, because most, if not all of them, will suffer from the red ring of death at some point. But if you're willing to do that, then you're going to have a really cool console in your collection that lets you play old 360 games. However, if you're just looking for something to sit down in front of and play, and you don't want to have to consider if it's going to get a red ring and how to fix it if it does, the Xbox 360 Slim is definitely less likely to run into those problems. However, it is still getting up there in age, being 13 years old at this point. And of course, you have the downside of those stupid touch buttons, but it also has benefits like integrated Wi-Fi and of course the sleeker hard drive module solution. But if you want both of those things and a smaller, slightly smaller console, a much more refined looking console, meaning it just looks basic, and no stupid touch buttons on front, you can always go with the Xbox 360e, because it's also one of the consoles where, even used, it's going to have a lot less mileage on it than something like an S, and definitely a lot less mileage than something like the original 360. For me, I'm going to use the E for the heavier work of streaming on my Xbox 360, but if I want to play on my TV out here, I'm going to hook up the S, because I don't want to run the risk of having to tear down an Xbox 360 original again, because, well, I've done that enough in my life. Either way, that's been it. Thank you all so much for sitting through this rather long comparison video. I hope you all actually got something out of it. Let me know in the comments, which one of these consoles would you get? And don't just say PlayStation 3, because you're just going to be a fanboy at that point. But let me know what you all think. I really do enjoy making these videos. If you enjoy watching these videos, definitely make sure to give it a like. If you really like it and you want to continue to support the channel, definitely make sure to subscribe, because I do these every Friday. And aside from that, I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.